Hey everyone. So many of you have asked for a deep dive into what Trump back in the White House could mean for space.
It's certainly a hot topic.
For sure. We've got these two articles, one from Space News and one from the Planetary Society, and they're full of predictions and expert opinions.
Should be fascinating.
Yeah, and they paint a picture of some serious potential upheaval, like the Artemis program, Elon Musk's influence, maybe some big shakeups at NASA.
And of course, commercial space companies are going to be a huge part of this conversation.
Absolutely. So, ready to blast off and dig into all of this?
Let's do it.
Okay, so one of the first things that jumps out from these articles is this whole Musk-Trump alliance.
Right, that's a big one.
One article even talks about Musk being tapped to co-lead this new Department of Government Efficiency.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. Streamlining the government, cutting regulations.
Exactly. And, when you think about it, that could have massive implications for SpaceX.
Huge, especially considering their ambitious plans. They're aiming for 25 Starship launches just this year.
Wow, 25. I mean, that's already a lot.
It is, and then they're hoping to ramp it up to like 100 launches per year after that.
100. That's incredible.
It is. But of course, not everyone's thrilled about the idea of fewer regulations.
Right, like the space safety expert Tommaso Scaba, he brings up some valid concerns.
Absolutely. I mean, less red tape could mean faster progress, but at what cost? Safety has to be the top priority.
Definitely. I mean, it makes you think, could this push for speed mean cutting corners down the line? What do you think?
It's a valid concern, and it's something we need to keep a close eye on, especially considering SpaceX is already, well, they're kind of a powerhouse in the space industry.
For sure. They're already leading the pack.
They are. So you can imagine if they're given even more, let's say, preferential treatment under a Trump administration, well, it could really shake things up.
Oh, yeah. It's like giving the biggest kid in school even more advantages.
Right. It could create a situation where it's tough for other companies to compete, which could stifle innovation, potentially.
That's a really good point. And speaking of shaking things up, we've got to talk about the moon versus Mars debate.
Yes, Musk's big Mars push.
Right. I mean, he literally tweeted that going straight to Mars should be the priority and called the moon a distraction.
A distraction. That's pretty bold.
Super bold, but is it realistic? I mean, didn't we see something similar with Obama back in 2010?
We did. Obama also wanted to go Mars first, and Congress basically shut it down.
They did. So what makes Musk think it'll be any different this time around?
Well, it might not be. Marcia Smith, who's a veteran space policy expert, she predicts that Congress is going to push back again.
Makes sense. They seem pretty set on that whole moon to Mars roadmap, right?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And there's also the international angle to consider.
Oh, right. If the U.S. suddenly bails on the moon, you have to wonder what other countries are thinking, especially China, with their lunar program ramping up.
Exactly. And then there are all our partners who are already invested in Artemis, especially with the Lunar Gateway.
The gateway, yeah. What kind of message would it send to them if we just abandoned it?
Not a good one, probably. European Space Agency, Canada, Japan, they're all in on this. It could really strain those partnerships. And, there are whispers that the Gateway might be on the chopping block anyway because of, the usual suspects, cost overruns, delays.
Yeah, those pesky overruns. Always causing trouble. But wasn't the Gateway supposed to be this big international hub for, all kinds of lunar exploration?
It was. And the overruns, they're not small. There's a lot of factors at play.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, technical challenges, they've had changing mission requirements, some unexpected delays. It all adds up.
It does. It's a tough situation. On one hand, yeah, we need to be smart with money. But on the other hand, we can't just stop exploring space. It feels like a delicate balance.
It is. And speaking of budget battles, we got to talk about the SLS rocket.
Right, the big one. So is SpaceX's Starship about to kick it to the curb? Is that what we're looking at?
It's a classic face-off. You've got the SLS, NASA's massive, super expensive, sometimes delayed mega rocket.
It's had its fair share of critics.
It has. And then you've got Starship, the reusable, the up-and-comer. But here's the thing. That article points out that despite all the criticism, SLS has got some serious support in Congress.
Oh, that's right. There was that mandate back in 2010.
Exactly. It's not going away easily. So, yeah, maybe killing the SLS entirely, that might be a bit too politically difficult.
Yeah, you're probably right.
But maybe, just maybe, specific versions like the Block 1B could be vulnerable.
I think I read something about that. There were concerns about cost savings with that one.
Right. So maybe we're looking at a bit of trimming around the edges, but keeping the core SLS program alive, to keep those Congress folks happy.
Makes sense. Keep everyone happy. Now, this is a wild one. Are you ready for this? Trump has picked Jared Isaacman to head NASA.
Oh, wow. The billionaire who flew with SpaceX.
Yeah. Not your typical government appointee. I mean, what does this tell us? Is this like a huge signal that commercial spaceflight is going to be the main focus?
It's definitely an unusual pick. I mean, he brings that commercial spaceflight perspective to the table, for sure. But who knows what'll happen during Senate confirmation?
Yeah, good point.
And even if he gets confirmed, how much influence he'll actually have over NASA's direction?
Yeah,
That's a big question mark.
it is. Lots of unknowns there.
Definitely. It's kind of like we're in this Wild West era of space. You know, you've got these space cowboys and all this political maneuvering going on.
It's definitely an exciting time to be following space.
It is. Oh, and what about the Space Force? How do you think they'll be affected?
Ooh, good one. Well, for starters, there's talk about moving them from Colorado to Alabama, which I'm sure is going to cause some drama.
Oh, yeah, that'll ruffle some feathers.
Definitely. But more importantly, I think we can expect some serious budget battles in Congress.
For sure. Especially with all the talk about cutting spending and trying to reduce the national debt.
Yeah. It's always about the money.
It is, and it makes you realize how tricky this whole thing is.
Yeah.
Even within the same political party, you've got competing priorities.
Totally. Okay, last big topic, climate change. What did the article say about that?
Well, it seems like the Trump administration might try to cut funding for climate and earth science initiatives.
Again.
Yeah, potentially. But remember, Congress pushed back on similar cuts during Trump's first term. So we might see a similar fight this time around.
Especially when it comes to NOAA, right? They play a big role in climate research and weather forecasting.
Absolutely, they do. So it could get pretty heated.
It's almost like we're prioritizing reaching for Mars while neglecting our own planet. It's kind of, well, it's a bit backwards, don't you think?
It does highlight that sometimes short-term political goals don't always align with the long-term needs of, well, keeping our planet healthy. And that tension, it could get even more intense under Trump.
It's certainly something to think about. But before we go too far down that road, let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, what Trump's policies could mean for international collaboration.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It really does feel like we're at a turning point. On one hand, there's this big push for working with commercial companies, with SpaceX likely being the biggest winner.
Right.
But then on the other hand, there's the risk of alienating our traditional partners like ESA and CSA, especially if projects like the Gateway get cut.
It's a delicate balance. It's like the U.S. wants to stay on top in space,
Yeah.
but they've got to juggle these relationships with both commercial players and international partners.
It's a lot to manage, and let's not forget about the potential for roadblocks within the U.S. itself.
Yeah, good point.
We've already talked about Congress potentially resisting a Mars-only approach, and then there are those looming budget battles over all these different space programs.
Speaking of budgets, what about NASA's overall budget? Do we have any clues about what might happen there?
Well, the articles didn't give us any specific numbers.
Right.
But they definitely paint a picture of, like, competing pressures, The Trump administration wants to cut spending overall.
Right.
But then there's the possibility of more money going into specific areas like commercial space flight and maybe even the Space Force.
So are we thinking NASA might end up with a smaller budget overall, but with more of that money being directed to private companies like SpaceX?
That's definitely a possibility. And that would be a pretty big shift from how NASA has traditionally operated, right? I mean, they've usually relied more on government-led projects.
They have. And that's what makes the Jared Isaacman pick so interesting.
Right. If he's confirmed, I mean, his background is all about commercial spaceflight. Wouldn't that make him more likely to embrace that kind of shift?
It's certainly possible. I mean, his experience with SpaceX suggests he's all about public-private partnerships. But we can't forget, he's going to be working within a very, let's say, complex political system.
Mm-hmm.
And Congress, ultimately, they're the ones who control the money.
So even with someone like Isaacman leading NASA, there's no guarantee they'll go all in on this commercial-first approach.
Exactly. It all comes down to so many factors. The political climate, what the administration decides to prioritize, it's all a bit of a guessing game.
It really is. There are just so many moving pieces.
There are. It's like watching a game of chess, but in space. Every move could completely change the game.
And the stakes are incredibly high. I mean, this isn't just about national pride or even scientific progress. It's about, like, the entire future of space exploration, how humanity is going to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
You put it perfectly. This is a major turning point. What happens over these next few months, even years, It's going to have huge consequences.
Absolutely. And it'll be fascinating to see how it all unfolds.
Absolutely fascinating. It does feel like we're standing at this crossroads for space, you know. The choices we make right now, they could really shape things for decades. And it's not just about the big players.
That's a really good point. I mean, what about all those smaller space startups out there and the researchers working on these cutting edge technologies? How will they be affected by all this?
That's a huge question.
Yeah.
It's about access and, well, inclusivity. Will space just become this playground for billionaires and these massive corporations?
Right.
Or will there be room for all these different players with different goals and motivations?
That's a big one. Because it would be a shame to see all that innovation and that spirit of exploration get stifled because of lack of opportunity.
Definitely. And speaking of different motivations, I think we also have to think about, the bigger picture here, the ethics, the philosophy behind space exploration.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, as we keep pushing further out there, we're going to encounter new challenges, new dilemmas. How do we make sure we're acting responsibly? What values should guide us as we explore space?
These are questions that, well, humanity has been grappling with for centuries, right?
That's true.
But they take on a whole new urgency when we're talking about colonizing other planets, or maybe even encountering extraterrestrial life.
Oh, that's mind-blowing. And we can't forget about the impact on Earth. We've already talked about climate research funding potentially being cut. But what about the environmental cost of just more space travel itself?
Right. It's not exactly eco-friendly to launch all those rockets.
It's not. They release pollutants, and then there's the whole problem of space debris. It's a growing threat.
It is. As we do more in space, we really have to consider the consequences for both Earth and the space environment itself. It's about finding that balance between pushing the boundaries and being sustainable.
Sustainability, yeah. That's a good word for it. Which brings us back to the Space Force. We touched on the whole relocation thing. But what about their mission, their priorities? How will those be affected by Trump being back in charge?
I think that's an area where we're likely to see some big changes. Remember, Trump was a big advocate for the Space Force during his first term.
He was.
So I think he's going to push to make it even bigger, give it more power.
More power, yeah. And I think it's fair to say we might see their focus shift to be, well, maybe a bit more aggressive.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. There's a real worry that the Space Force could become too militarized,
Yeah.
and that could escalate tensions with other countries.
No one wants an arms race in space.
Exactly. It's a tough balancing act. They need to be strong enough to protect national security, but they can't go too far and trigger, some kind of space war.
We need rules, right? International agreements.
We do. If we want to avoid space becoming a battleground, everyone needs to be on the same page.
And it can't just be governments talking to each other. It's got to be scientists, engineers, the public. Everyone needs to be involved in this conversation.
Absolutely. It's a global responsibility, shaping the future of space. And it's not just about what happens in Washington or at SpaceX headquarters. It's about the choices we make as a society. Do we want a future where space is all about conflict and competition? Or do we want one where it's about collaboration and sharing these incredible discoveries?
I know what I'd choose. I think most people would agree that we should be working together in space.
I agree.
But it's not going to happen automatically, is it? We have to actively work towards that future.
We do. And I think education is a big part of that. People need to understand why space exploration matters. They need to know about the challenges and the benefits. We need to inspire the next generation of explorers.
That's so true. We have to make space exciting.
We do.
And speaking of inspiring, let's not forget about the power of, well, human stories.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Think about those astronauts on the International Space Station looking down at Earth from up there.
I bet they have an amazing perspective.
They do. Imagine what they must think about all the stuff happening down here.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? It shows us how connected we all are and how fragile our planet is.
For sure.
When you see Earth from space, there are no borders, no divisions.
Just one planet.
Exactly. And I think that perspective, it can inspire us to be better, to overcome our differences and work together to create a better future.
A better future for everyone. It's about recognizing that we're all on this journey together. Earth is our spaceship, and space exploration, that's our collective adventure.
Beautifully said. It's not just about the immediate problems, it's about that long-term potential of what we can achieve in space. It's about expanding our knowledge, pushing the boundaries, and understanding our place in the universe.
It's amazing to think how far we've come with space exploration,
Yeah.
from those first steps on the moon to, well, the International Space Station. And now with companies like SpaceX, it really does feel like a new era is about to begin.
It's an incredible time to be involved in space, that's for sure. But as we keep pushing further, I think it's important to remember the lessons we've learned along the way.
Yeah, that's true.
We have to make sure space exploration benefits all of humanity, not just, a select few.
Right, that's a big one. We've talked a lot about the commercialization of space, and I can't help but wonder, how do we ensure that everyone benefits? I mean, will future generations just be looking up, seeing all these private space stations and lunar bases and wondering if there's still room for them?
That's a question we need to be asking ourselves right now. We need to make sure that space explorations stays accessible to everyone, regardless of their background or, well, how much money they have. It's about creating a sense of shared responsibility for the future of space.
Absolutely. And speaking of the future, I keep thinking about all those sci-fi movies where we've colonized Mars and have outposts on these distant moons. It's exciting and a little scary to think about all that. Do you think that kind of future is actually possible?
I think it is, yeah. But it won't be easy. It's going to take commitment from everyone. Governments, private companies, individuals, everyone. We'll need huge technological leaps, scientific breakthroughs, and we'll need to overcome some pretty big obstacles.
It sounds like it'll be a massive global effort, something that goes beyond politics and national borders.
Exactly. We have to remember, we're all part of the same human family, all sharing this one planet. And as we explore space, we carry the dreams and hopes of all humankind with us.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a reminder that space exploration isn't just about science or technology, it's about pushing ourselves to be better and understanding our place in this vast universe.
It is.
Well, to all our listeners out there, we want to leave you with this. Keep looking up at the sky, keep asking those big questions, and never stop exploring. The future of space is still being written, and you have a part to play in shaping it.
Whether you dream of being an astronaut, you're a scientist pushing the boundaries of what we know, or you're just someone who loves gazing at the stars, remember that the cosmos belongs to all of us. And this incredible journey, it's just beginning.